Racist cop mocks black woman until her silent signal triggers an internal investigation targeting him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jasmine Carter sat quietly in the crowded courtroom, her expression calm yet determined, her eyes locked on the judge, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Jasmine wasn't here by chance. She had been carefully selected for this moment, to witness a trial that was about to take a turn no one could predict. She wasn't just another woman in a crowded room. Her presence here was part of a bigger plan, one that would ultimately lead to the exposure of corruption lurking in the very heart of the system meant to uphold justice. The scene was set perfectly. The courtroom, a cold and sterile space, filled with people who were too quick to judge, to assume, and too blind to see the truth hidden in plain sight. The air was thick with tension as the prosecutor, with his polished shoes and rehearsed gestures, made his case. Jasmine was used to such settings, used to being underestimated, used to being looked past. But today, she wouldn't be silenced. Today, she would turn the tables. Officer Blake, seated at the defendant's table, was confident. Too confident. His smirk, the way he exchanged knowing glances with the judge, his clear disregard for the seriousness of the charges against him. All of it made Jasmine's blood boil. He mocked her as she sat there, as if she were invisible. The moment he leaned back in his chair and made that casual, dismissive remark about her, Jasmine knew it was time. The room fell silent as Blake's voice echoed through the chamber, filled with a mocking tone. What are you doing here? You just a witness or another one of these types? Try to get some attention. His words hung in the air, dripping with arrogance. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she sat there, her eyes meeting his not with fear, but with something else. Something far more powerful than he could ever comprehend. She had a secret that no one in this room, not even Blake, could have imagined. As he continued to rant and rave, Jasmine calmly reached in her bag, her fingers brushing against the device hidden inside. A silent signal, a subtle gesture, a signal that would set in motion the very thing that Blake had never seen coming. The investigation, the one that had been brewing for months, was about to be triggered. And when the truth came to light, when they finally realized who she really was, it would be too late for Blake to do anything about it. Jasmine wasn't just a victim in this story. She was the force of justice. She was the one who would ensure that the system would pay for what it had allowed to happen. She was the one who had the power to change the game. And when that power was revealed, when the truth was finally exposed, it would send shockwaves through the courtroom, through the very foundation of law enforcement, and through the lives of everyone who thought they were above the law. Jasmine Carter wasn't just here to watch a trial unfold. She was here to make sure the scales of justice tipped in the right direction. Jasmine Carter's heart raced ever so slightly, though her exterior remained as calm as ever. Officer Blake, the man who had so carelessly mocked her, still sat at the defendant's table, his posture rigid with arrogance. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. Jasmine had been gathering evidence for months, silently observing and documenting his every move, every slight, and every abuse of power. This courtroom, with its high ceilings and cold stone walls, was about to be the stage for a revelation none of them could predict. The prosecutor was droning on, his words a blur in Jasmine's ears as she focused on the man who thought he was untouchable. Blake's smirk never wavered, oblivious to the storm that was coming his way. Jasmine couldn't help but think how easy it was for him to believe that his badge and uniform could shield him from the consequences of his actions. It was exactly this kind of arrogance that made him dangerous. The courtroom buzzed quietly as whispers passed between the audience, but Jasmine's attention was fixed solely on Blake. She knew that it wouldn't be long before the truth came out, and when it did, there would be no turning back. As the prosecutor finished his statements, The judge turned his gaze toward Jasmine, ready to hear her testimony. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. Her calm was unsettling, but it was nothing compared to the chaos that would soon erupt. As she approached the witness stand, Blake's eyes narrowed, clearly sizing her up. He looked at her like she was just another face in the crowd, just another victim to dismiss. But that was about to change. Jasmine took her place, and the room fell into a hushed silence. She didn't need to say a word to make her presence known. Her stillness spoke volumes. She had prepared for this moment for so long. Every piece of evidence was ready, every detail accounted for. As she began to speak, her voice was steady, yet it carried a weight that commanded attention. She recounted the events leading to this trial, each word carefully chosen to highlight Blake's arrogance, his disregard for the law, and the countless injustices he had perpetrated. Blake's gaze flickered nervously as he realized that something was amiss. This wasn't just a witness giving a statement. This was something far more significant. Jasmine continued, her tone unwavering. She described the incidents she had observed, how Blake had harassed and targeted innocent people, how he had abused his power, and how he had gotten away with it for far too long. But what Blake didn't know was that Jasmine wasn't just a witness. She wasn't just a victim. She was the key to a much larger investigation, one that had been building quietly behind the scenes. As Jasmine finished her account, she paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Blake was no longer the confident man he had been at the beginning of the trial. His posture had shifted, his arrogance now replaced with uncertainty. The room, once filled with murmurs, was now completely still. Jasmine knew the moment had come. She reached into her bag, just as she had planned. With a calm motion, she activated the device hidden inside, sending a silent signal that would trigger the investigation that would bring Blake's entire world crashing down. The room went silent for a second, the tension so thick it could be felt in the air. Blake's face went pale as he realized what had just happened. His own actions, the very things he thought he could get away with, were about to be exposed for all to see. Jasmine didn't need to say anything more. She had already won. The investigation was now in motion, and it wouldn't be long before Blake was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Jasmine turned, her expression still calm, but inside, she felt a surge of triumph. The power had shifted. In a courtroom full of judgment, she had just delivered the final blow, and justice was finally on its way. Jasmine Carter sat down slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could feel the weight of the moment, the realization settling in that the tide was turning in her favor. Officer Blake's smug expression had disappeared, replaced by a faint but noticeable look of panic. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence slipping away. The room was filled with a tense silence, the kind that happens just before the storm breaks. Jasmine could see the small, subtle shifts in the way people in the courtroom were looking at her now. The whispers had stopped. The air felt heavier, as though everyone was finally understanding the magnitude of what was happening. She didn't need to do anything more. The plan was in motion, and it would soon reach its inevitable conclusion. The judge cleared his throat, glancing down at the paperwork in front of him. His gavel was still in his hand, but there was a noticeable hesitation in his movements, as if he too was waiting for something to change. It was in this stillness that Jasmine allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. But there was no time to rest. The battle was far from over. The real fight would begin once the internal investigation into Blake was underway. Jasmine had orchestrated every step, ensuring that her role remained hidden until the right moment. She had followed him, documented his wrongdoings, and now she had given the signal to the authorities who would make sure Blake could no longer hide behind his badge. As the minutes passed, Jasmine's calm demeanor remained unbroken. She could hear the faint rustling of papers as the prosecutor conferred. With his team, the occasional sound of a chair creaking as a spectator shifted in their seat. It was a waiting game now, and Jasmine was prepared. Blake's eyes darted nervously toward the exits, his hand twitching at his side, as if he were already thinking of running. But it was too late for him to escape. The investigation was already on its way, and there would be nowhere for him to hide. The system he had relied on to protect him was crumbling. In the days that followed, Jasmine watched as the pieces of her plan fell into place. Blake's world began to unravel as the internal investigation exposed his past crimes. The evidence she had gathered meticulously, quietly, was enough to bring his actions to light. The investigation uncovered a pattern of abuse, misconduct, and corruption that Blake had thought was buried forever. His colleagues, who had once turned a blind eye, were now forced to confront the reality of what he had done. Jasmine's role remained anonymous, a shadow behind the scenes. She had done her job, and now the system would do its part. Blake's arrest was inevitable. The evidence was overwhelming. Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. The internal investigation would open the doors for more to come forward, more officers who had hidden their wrongdoings under the guise of authority. But for now, Jasmine allowed herself a brief moment of peace. She had exposed one of the system's flaws, and it felt like a small victory for justice. Jasmine knew she couldn't change everything at once, but this was a step towards something bigger. As the days passed, she continued to work quietly, her attention always focused on the bigger picture. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory had been claimed, and Jasmine Carter, though still an invisible force, knew that her efforts had made a difference. Jasmine Carter sat in her office, staring out the window as the city bustled below her. The weight of the last few days hung in the air, but there was a sense of calm now, a stillness that hadn't been there before. The internal investigation into Officer Blake had gained momentum, and as the evidence continued to pile up, his fate was sealed. Jasmine knew that this was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, but it was a significant one. Blake had been just the beginning. The system he represented was about to be exposed for its flaws, its corruption, its unwillingness to hold its own accountable. But Jasmine wasn't celebrating. She wasn't a hero. She was doing her job, and there was still much work to be done. Every day, she had to remind herself that there was no room for complacency, no room for taking a break. This battle was just one in a long war for justice. Jasmine's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her superior. Meeting at 2 p.m. Updates on Blake's case. Be ready. She sighed, setting the phone down. She wasn't surprised by the summons, but the pressure was beginning to weigh on her. Every move she made was scrutinized, every step monitored. Her work was far from over, and it wasn't just about Blake anymore. It was about the bigger picture. As the clock ticked down to 2 p.m., Jasmine prepared herself mentally for the meeting. She had gathered everything, reports, surveillance footage, statements from witnesses, and now it was time to put it all together. Blake had been just a cog in a machine, but his downfall was about to bring the whole system under scrutiny. When she arrived at the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Several colleagues sat around the table, their faces etched with determination. The door closed behind her, and all eyes turned toward her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She knew her role in this moment. She was the one who had uncovered the rot, and now it was time for the system to deal with it. The meeting began, and Jasmine spoke clearly, outlining the progress of the investigation. She shared the findings, detailing how Blake had used his position to exploit vulnerable people, how he had been a part of a larger network of corruption. As she spoke, the room grew quieter, the weight of her words sinking in. There were no questions, no interruptions. The facts spoke for themselves. As the meeting wrapped up, Jasmine felt a rare sense of satisfaction. She had done what she set out to do. Blake's fate was now in the hands of the authorities, and his downfall would be the catalyst for larger changes. Jasmine knew that this wasn't the end of the road. It was just the beginning. There would be more cases, more corruption to uncover, and more justice to fight for. But for now, she allowed herself a brief moment of peace. She had done what she had to do, and for once she allowed herself to feel a small sense of victory. She stood up, gave a nod to her colleagues, and walked out of the room. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Jasmine Carter was not just a bystander in the system. She was the force that would bring it down. and she would keep fighting one step at a time. Jasmine Carter arrived at her apartment late that evening, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. The meeting with her colleagues had gone as expected. Blake's case was moving forward, the wheels of justice finally in motion. Yet, despite the satisfaction of progress, a sense of unease lingered. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Every day, more stories surfaced of corruption, of power abused, of innocent people crushed beneath the weight of the system. Jasmine had known this was coming when she first began her journey. But now that she was so deep in it, she couldn't help but feel the gravity of what she was up against. This was just one case, a small piece of the puzzle. She had been at this long enough to know that for every corrupt officer brought to justice, there were countless others still hiding in the shadows. As she sat down at her desk, the soft hum of her laptop the only sound in the room, she reflected on how far she had come. When she first joined the FBI, it was with the idealistic notion that she could make a difference. But the reality of the job had been harder to swallow. The deeper she dug into the cases, the more she saw the cracks in the system. And yet, she never gave up. She couldn't afford to. The phone on her desk buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was another message from her superior. Blake's team is scrambling. They're trying to cover their tracks. Don't let up. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She had expected this, but now it was official. Blake wasn't going down without a fight. She had expected him to react like this. He wasn't just going to accept the consequences of his actions. His entire career, his reputation, was on the line. But what he didn't realize was that the investigation had already spread far beyond him. The corruption he had been a part of was about to be uncovered, piece by piece. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had a choice to make now. She could continue down the path she had started, exposing one officer after another, slowly chipping away at the system, or she could take a different approach. The stakes were higher now. She had more power than ever before. Blake's case was just the beginning, and she knew she had to be strategic about how she moved forward. The game had changed. Jasmine knew that the road ahead would be difficult. It would be filled with obstacles, with people trying to stop her, with forces more powerful than she could imagine. But she wasn't afraid. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts. She had seen the worst of the system, but she had also seen the power of truth, of justice. She wasn't going to let it slip away. As she shut down her laptop and stood up, she made a promise to herself. She would take this fight all the way. Blake's downfall would be the spark, but it was the larger system that needed to be torn down. And Jasmine Carter was the one who was going to do it. Jasmine Carter sat in her car, parked on a quiet street, the cool night air drifting in through the cracked window. The city around her was still, but inside her mind, everything was in motion. The investigation into Officer Blake had reached a critical point, and she knew the pressure was mounting. Every decision, every move she made now, would be under the microscope. Jasmine's phone buzzed again, a reminder that the stakes were higher than ever. She glanced down at the screen, an alert from her department. Blake's defense team is gathering evidence. Be cautious. The message was brief, but it carried weight. Blake was far from defeated, and his team was already working to discredit the case against him. It was exactly what she had expected. He wouldn't go down without a fight, and neither would the system that had protected him for so long. Jasmine had seen how the system worked, how it was built to keep the powerful in control and the vulnerable in their place. But she wasn't afraid. She had learned long ago that justice wasn't handed out easily. It had to be fought for, and she had been fighting for it her entire career. Jasmine took a deep breath and pulled out of her parking space, driving through the quiet streets, her destination unknown. It was late, and the world seemed to be asleep, but her mind raced with the possibilities of what was to come. She knew Blake would try to shift the narrative, to paint himself as the victim, but Jasmine wasn't worried. She had already prepared for this moment. The evidence was irrefutable, and she had made sure that the right people were in place to see it through. As she reached her apartment, Jasmine's thoughts turned to the bigger picture. Blake was just one officer, one small part of a much larger web of corruption that had been allowed to thrive unchecked. His downfall was important, but it wasn't the end of the battle. She knew that there were others out there, hiding in plain sight, using their badges as shields while they perpetuated the same abuses. Jasmine wasn't naive enough to think that she could take down the entire system in one fell swoop. But she knew she could make a difference, one case at a time. As she walked into her apartment, Jasmine's phone buzzed once more. It was a call this time from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Jasmine Carter," she said, her voice steady. "We've been watching Blake's team," the voice on the other end said. "They're making moves, but we've got our eyes on them. Don't worry, we've got your back." Jasmine felt a small wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just her anymore. She wasn't alone in this fight. The message was clear. The system was being watched, and it would be held accountable. With renewed determination, Jasmine hung up the phone and sat down at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The battle was far from over, but it was progressing. Blake's case would be the catalyst for something much larger. Jasmine wasn't sure how long it would take or what would happen next, but she was ready. She had made a choice, and she wasn't going to back down. The fight for justice had only just begun. Jasmine. Carter stood in front of the window, watching as the city lights flickered below. Her mind was still racing with thoughts of the investigation, the slow crawl of justice that had been set in motion. Despite the progress, there was a lingering sense of urgency. Blake's defense team had started pushing back harder, trying to create doubt, throwing around questions about the integrity of the investigation. Jasmine knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to deal with. She had expected resistance, but the weight of the fight was beginning to take its toll. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her superior, meeting at 10 a.m. Critical updates on Blake's case. Prepare. The words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She had known the meeting was coming, but the timing made it feel like everything was happening at once. She glanced at the clock. She had a few hours to gather her thoughts and finalize the strategy for the next phase of the investigation. Jasmine wasn't a stranger to pressure, but this was different. She wasn't just trying to bring one man to justice. She was fighting against a system that had been built to protect those who thought they were above the law. The system was vast, and Blake was just a small piece of it. As she prepared for the meeting, her thoughts turned to the next step. Blake's case had become a beacon, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. And Jasmine knew that she was the one who would have to light the way for the others who would follow. She wasn't naive enough to think that Blake's arrest would fix everything. There would be more cases, more resistance, but each small victory would build the momentum needed to create real change. She had spent years learning how to navigate the system's complexities, how to work in the shadows, and gather the evidence that could take down the corrupt. And now, she was at the forefront of a movement that would change everything. Jasmine took a deep breath and grabbed her coat. The meeting was about to begin, and she couldn't afford to waste any time. The room at headquarters was already filled with her colleagues when she arrived. Their faces were a mix of determination and concern, but Jasmine remained calm. She had a job to do, and she was ready to do it. The meeting started, and the details of Blake's defense began to unfold. His team was already building a case against the credibility of the witnesses, trying to discredit the investigation as politically motivated. Jasmine listened intently, her expression unreadable. She knew this was going to be a battle of words, a war of narratives. The key was to stay ahead, to anticipate their moves. As the meeting continued, Jasmine carefully laid out the strategy. She had already planned for this. She had backup witnesses, additional evidence, and the full support of the internal teams who were watching Blake's every move. She wasn't just defending the case. She was preparing for the next round. The room grew quieter as Jasmine spoke, her words firm and decisive. Every person in the room could feel the weight of her conviction, the belief that they were on the right side of history. When the meeting concluded, there was no question about what needed to be done next. Blake's case was moving forward, and Jasmine was leading the charge. As she left the room, the weight of the responsibility hung on her shoulders, but she didn't waver. This was what she had worked for, what she had fought for. The battle was far from over, but Jasmine Carter was ready for whatever came next. Jasmine Carter walked into the bustling office the next morning, her mind already sharp with focus. The previous day's meeting had been a success, but she knew it was only the beginning. Blake's defense team had thrown up roadblocks, trying to discredit everything from witness testimony to the credibility of the investigation itself. But Jasmine wasn't deterred. She had anticipated this move, and she was ready. As she sat at her desk, the weight of the case pressed on her shoulders, but there was also a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer. This was about taking down an entire system. The phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her thoughts. She answered quickly, recognizing the number on the screen. "Jasmine," a familiar voice said. "We have intel. Blake's team is trying to influence key witnesses. They're digging into their backgrounds, looking for anything they can use." Jasmine's grip tightened on the phone, her jaw clenching in frustration. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud still stung. "Stay on them," Jasmine replied. "We're not backing down." The conversation ended, and Jasmine leaned back at her chair, her thoughts racing. Blake's team was playing dirty, trying to use every trick in the book to save him. But Jasmine wasn't new to this game. She had faced far worse. She'd seen how the system bent for people like Blake, how power and influence could cover up the truth. But she wasn't going to let it happen again. She was done standing by while the corrupt flourished. The next few hours were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Jasmine worked tirelessly with her team, ensuring that every piece of evidence was in place and that every witness was protected. The stakes had never been higher. But despite the pressure, Jasmine felt a quiet confidence growing within her. She wasn't alone in this fight. More and more people were waking up to the truth. More and more were starting to see the cracks in the system. As the day wore on, Jasmine received another call. This time it was from her superior, who spoke with a tone of urgency. "Jasmine, you need to see this. Blake's team has leaked something to the press. They're trying to frame the entire investigation as a personal vendetta. We need to control the narrative." Jasmine exhaled slowly, feeling a surge of determination. She had been prepared for this. She knew that the media would play a role in this fight. But it wouldn't be the first time she'd had to deal with a narrative that wasn't true. "I'll handle it," she replied, her voice steady. She wasn't going to let the media shift the focus away from the real issue, justice. She stood up from her desk, her mind already strategizing the next move. It was time to take back control of the narrative. She knew that exposing Blake's corruption wasn't just about winning the case. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could get away with it. They couldn't. Jasmine wasn't going to stop until the system that protected people like Blake was brought down. She wasn't going to let this story end with just one victory. As she walked out of her office, she knew the battle wasn't over, but she was more determined than ever to finish it. Jasmine Carter was ready for whatever came next. Jasmine Carter sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the documents in front of her. The weight of the case had never been heavier. Blake's team had been relentless, using every tactic they could to create doubt and discredit her work. Yet, she knew the truth couldn't be hidden for much longer. She had spent years learning how to navigate the complexities of a justice system, and now every piece of her training was being put to the test. The room was quiet, except for the soft tapping of her fingers against the keyboard. Jasmine had just finished reviewing the latest updates when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her team. "Media is picking up Blake's story. They're spinning it. Prepare a public statement." Jasmine didn't flinch. She had expected the media to get involved sooner or later. She was used to fighting battles on multiple fronts, and this was no different. It was time to take control of the narrative once and for all. She quickly typed out a response to her team. "Let's get a statement ready. I'll handle it from here." As she stood up and walked to the window, her mind raced through the options. The press could be a powerful ally or a formidable adversary. But Jasmine had always believed in transparency. The truth was her weapon. She had nothing to hide. She wasn't going to let Blake's lies go unchallenged. She knew the public had to hear the facts, and they needed to hear it from her. The following morning, Jasmine stood before a crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed, capturing her every move, but she remained composed, focused on the task at hand. As she stepped up to the podium, she scanned the room, meeting the eyes of the journalists who had come to hear her speak. She took a deep breath, then began. Good morning. I'm Jasmine Carter, and I'm here today to address the allegations surrounding the investigation into Officer Blake. I want to be clear. The work we're doing is not personal. This is about justice. This is about exposing corruption within the system and ensuring that those who abuse their power are held accountable. Her voice was steady, calm, but with an underlying strength that resonated with everyone in the room. For months, we've been gathering evidence, speaking with witnesses, and following the facts. The truth cannot be ignored. Officer Blake's actions have caused harm, and it is our duty to ensure that justice is served, no matter how powerful the individual may be. This case is not about any one person. It's about the integrity of our justice system. The room was silent, the reporters hanging on every word. Jasmine continued, "We will not be swayed by false narratives or attempts to discredit this investigation. We will continue to follow the facts, no matter where they lead. This is about the people we serve, the victims who deserve justice, and the accountability that every law enforcement officer should be held to. The investigation will continue, and we will ensure that the truth comes to light." As she finished her statement, Jasmine stood tall, her confidence unwavering. The room was filled with the sound of cameras clicking, but Jasmine felt only a quiet sense of satisfaction. The narrative was shifting. Blake's defense team had tried to control the story, but Jasmine had just taken back the narrative. She knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope. The system was broken, but it could be fixed, one step at a time. Jasmine Carter was ready for whatever came next. She had fought for justice her entire life, and she wasn't going to stop now.